Systems don't feel frustration, people do. We spent weeks looking at the architecture of immigration, but today we're looking at the humans living inside it. Systems don't feel uncertainty, but people do. And systems don't lie awake at night wondering what happens next, but people do. Because behind every immigration policy, every court case, every application, and every headline, there are human beings trying to navigate a system that often asks very difficult questions and rarely offers simple answers. People trying to build a life, people trying to enforce the law, people trying to make decisions that affect millions of other people's lives. And that's what we're talking about today, not the system itself, the people living inside it. Think about what it takes to leave behind everything. Maybe it's courage. Maybe it's desperation. Maybe it's a little bit of both. Imagine crossing a desert or risking an ocean journey on a makeshift raft. Imagine leaving behind your home, your language, your family, and everything that you grew up with. Not because you're guaranteed a better life, but because you believe that there just might be one waiting for you. That's an extraordinary leap of faith. And for many people, it ends not with certainty, but with waiting. Wait for an interview. Wait for a hearing. Wait for a decision. Waiting for permission. Sometimes that waiting lasts for years or decades. Whatever someone's opinion about immigration may be, it's difficult to deny the amount of hope and sometimes desperation that exists inside those decisions. But hope and desperation aren't the only emotions living inside this system. There's another side to this story. Now imagine a different perspective. Imagine you spent years of your life working in border security, or in immigration enforcement, or the courts. You didn't create the laws, you didn't design the system, but every day you're asked to operate inside of it. And every day you meet people who are scared, people who are angry, people who are desperate, people who are hopeful. And sometimes you encounter the same person again and again and again. Not because they're dangerous, not because they're trying to harm anyone, but because they're stuck. And your responsibility doesn't change. The law still says what it says. And your job is still what your job is. Imagine carrying that tension around for years. Understanding someone's situation doesn't automatically change your responsibilities. And following your responsibilities doesn't often or even automatically remove your sympathy. In one interview, I remember watching a border agent, and he said that there were times when he simply wished there was more he could do to help the people standing in front of him. Imagine going to work with that in the back of your brain every day. I thought that was interesting, because it reminds us that enforcing the law and feeling compassion for someone's situation are not necessarily opposites. They can exist in the same person at the same time. And that tension can be just as difficult for the people enforcing the rules as it is for the people living underneath them. Now consider the child that's brought across the border into a country at 2 years of age. Too young to remember crossing the border or even know what a border is. Too young to make that decision. Too young to understand any of the consequences. This child grows up, goes to school, builds friendships, starts a career, raises a family, maybe even opens a business, maybe spends decades believing this country, the United States, is his home or her home. And for all practical purposes, it is. And then one day the truth comes out. Legally, their situation is far more complicated than they had ever realized. Now what? If you look only at the law, one answer may seem obvious. But if you look at that person's life that they have built, a different answer may seem just as obvious. And that's where many immigration debates become difficult. Not because the facts are unclear, but because human lives rarely fit neatly inside legal categories. Hey, but before I go any further, I would just like to say welcome, pull up a seat at the coffee table, grab a cup of coffee, and let's talk. If you like good conversations or that you just like what I do, please like the video, share the video, subscribe, and leave a comment. It is, after all, one of the last free things we have left. And it really does help my channel. And as always, I've included a PDF of the policy in the description below. Because understanding immigration isn't about understanding policies. It's also about understanding the people whose lives are shaped by them. And that's why the conversations can become uncomfortable. Because many of the competing ideas of immigration are not obviously false. A nation has laws. Those laws matter. And if those laws are never enforced, people begin to question whether they matter at all. And that's a legitimate concern. But immigration is also a humanitarian issue. Behind every application, every case file, every court hearing is a human being. That is also a legitimate concern. The challenge is that both can be true at the same time. And when those two truths collide, there's always an answer that leaves somebody else unsatisfied. That's the reality of the system and what it wrestles with every day. One of the things that stood out to me while researching immigration was how often frustration appeared in every direction. The immigrant waiting years for an answer. The family separated by a few pieces of paperwork. The border agent seeing the same situations repeated over and over again. The judge staring at another full docket. The caseworker buried underneath another stack of files. The frustration isn't identical, but it is real. The disappointment is not identical, but it is real. And understanding immigration means recognizing that many of the people inside the system are struggling with different versions of the same thing. A system that often moves slower than human lives do. Over the last 4 videos, we've looked at the system from almost every angle. We've looked at its structure, its history, why it's so difficult to change, and now the people who live inside it. But all of that leads to a bigger question. If immigration policy affects people in such different ways, what exactly is the policy trying to accomplish? What's the problems that it's trying to solve? And how do we measure whether it's succeeding or not? Because before we can talk about costs, trade-offs, or even pushback, we first have to understand the policy itself and what it's saying. And that's where we're going to go next. This is not in Kansas anymore, and I hope to see you in 1 week where we'll actually dive into the policy and see what it has to say. Goodbye.